Hello everyone and welcome back to a new video. Today I'm back with the knight versus pawn endgame. As you know, last time we saw the knight versus pawn endgame, but with the king able to reach the pawn. Today none of that is the case. Today's lesson will be focused on the knight and how the knight is actually able to stop the pawn on itself. And so this will be more of a longer video. We'll start off with two tactics and afterwards we'll have a look at four very important theoretical positions. We'll start off with this one. This is a little tactic for you guys. White wants to promote, but for now there is no way to do that, since after h6 the knight can simply take that pawn. Okay, so the answer to the puzzle is to play this beautiful move, which is knight to g7, attacking both the king and the knight at the same time. The knight is forced to take, and afterwards we actually will be able to promote after h6. King to f7, this knight stands in the way, and after h7 there is no way for the black king to stop this pawn, since this is an illegal move and the g7 square is already taken by the knight. It's also very important to note that if this king would stand on g2, the position is already very much different, and this is actually a draw. So maybe try and figure out on yourself what exactly is the difference between the king on h1 and the king on g2, and how can black make use of that. Okay, so let's have a look. If white would go for the same idea, actually after h6 we are able to play knight to e6, so we are able to give this check on f4, and afterwards we can reroute to protect the square on h8. So after this we can check and go knight to g6, and afterwards simply pick up this pawn with the king, since this square is now fully protected. Okay, these were two tactics, and now let's get into the real stuff, the theory of the knight versus pawn. So let's start off with this position. If the white knight is able to control the square before the pawn, then this is a draw. Okay, so in this case it's a draw if the white knight is able to control h2. In this case, for example, the knight is able to control this square on h4, so this is a draw. But the rule doesn't work with, for example, the corner square. In this case, for example, this is not a draw, so we are only talking about these squares. Let's first have a look at this example, and then let's have a look at the general rule. In this case, why does this not work after something like knight to g3, king to e1, let's say king to b7 and king to f2? As you can see, there is simply not enough space for the white knight. Let's say knight to h1 check, king to g2, and already this white knight is trapped. Let's now have a look at the general rule. And as you guys know, what we need to do is we need to control this square on h2. How can we possibly control this square? Well, that's pretty easy. We can, for example, give a check and afterwards go to g4. So let's say knight e3, king e2, and knight to g4. Right now we're controlling this square on h2, but what we do with the white knight, and it's very important to understand this, we will draw this by using all of these squares. And basically what we'll do is we will jump with the white knight from one square to the other, and by doing this there is no way for the black king to catch the knight, and we will still be able to control the most important squares on the board in order to not let this black pawn promote. Let's say king to f3, we go to h2, king to g2, well, we go back to g4. Let's say king to g3, well, we can't go back, so now we need to use another square. In this case, the only square we can use is e3, and now it looks like we're not controlling this square on h2. It doesn't matter, because after h2 we have knight to f1 check, and we will be able to pick up this pawn since this is a fork. Let's go back. Let's say he does something else like king to f3. In this case we go to f1. Basically you can try this out on yourself, but as long as we use all of these squares, there is no way for black to promote. This is a very nice technique for white to actually make sure to draw this endgame. This position is very difficult and is actually actually an exception to the rule. So in this position, we are not able to control this square on h2 in time, but actually black will be able to play this move h2 eventually. After that move, actually, as you guys know, we will have to control this square on h1, and usually, as we've just seen, there is no way in these cases to hold the position for white. The white knight has to protect the promoting square, which usually is losing for white. But in this case, it's just a little bit different. First of all, you should note that there is no way to try and trick black into some sort of knight fork. Let's say we would go for something like this, with the idea of trying to fork the king and the pawn, which will promote to a queen. There is actually no way to do that, since this is actually a check. So that's the first important thing to notice. The only move for white is to try and control this square on h1, which is by going to g3. And black plays the move h2. Also notice that if black would make the mistake of going to e3, by now you should understand that we make use of the technique we've just seen by controlling all of these squares. So how do we do that? Well, we play knight to f1, king to f2, and knight to h2, and we are in full control of the position. So black can't really do that, and instead what he should do, and actually the best move, is to play h2. And as I said, usually this would be dead lost, but there's a problem. White in this position plays the best move, which is king to b7. What's actually wrong with trying to attack the knight and trying to promote the pawn? Let's have a look. After king to e3, knight to f1 is played, attacking both the king and the pawn at the same time. So black can't do that. Nor can the black king go to a square like king to d2, because then he would fall for the same trick after knight to f1. So as you can see, and this is very interesting, this is kind of a barrier. There is no way for the black king to go to any of these squares. Not to e2 or to e4, because these squares are protected by the knight, nor to e3 or to d2, because the black king would be tricked with a fork. In this position, there are two options. He either has to go around like this, trying to take the knight, or just like this, trying to take the knight. The shortest way to go is to go to d4. So let's have a look at this. The white king comes closer. King to e5, king to c5, king to f4, and now a very nice move, knight to h1. And so how is this not a win for black? Because the black king will be able to take the knight. Yes, it's true. But in the end, the white king will be able to come very close in order to stalemate the black king. Just like this. Remember, we had this barrier. Let's say the king comes around just like this. King to c2. We come closer with the white king. Just like this. And also after king to f2, actually we're able to play something like king to f4. Or also what we can do is something like knight to h1 with the same idea of trying to stalemate, just like this, because there is no move for black at the moment, and this is of course a draw. A very nice one, and this is also some sort of tactical opportunity for white, which I really enjoy. Let's finally have a look at the very last position. This is a pretty difficult puzzle. I really want you to, with the knowledge that you've acquired today, try and solve this puzzle. So I think you understand by now that the most important thing for white is to try and control the squares before the black pawn. In this case, that would be h3. The problem with h3 is that the knight is far away, and to be able to reach h3, that's gonna be pretty much impossible, because what will happen is black will play this move soon. So maybe we should have a plan of trying to go to this square on h2. How can we possibly do that? Well, if we want to go to h2, then we have to be able to reach one of these squares. And actually there are different options in this position. So we could either go for a plan like this, maybe try to reach this square, or we could try and go for something like this, trying to reach this square. Let's start with this one. With this move, there is actually a big problem, and the problem is king to e2, and there is actually nothing to try and do against this move. First of all, you should notice that there is no real way to now go to this f1 square, which we actually wanted to reach. We should go for something like knight to e4. Now after h3 and knight to g3, trying to still reach some squares in the position, white would still have a draw if black is not careful. For example, after this move, king to f3, this would be a big mistake, because now we're able to go to f1 and control all of these squares just like this. If black is precise and plays this move, which is the best, king to e1, there is actually no way for the white knight to control any of these squares, and what will happen is the black pawn will go to h2, the king will come closer, and eventually black will be able to promote. Actually, the correct way to do it, and it's really not easy, but the only move for white is to go for this move, which is knight to e5, and this is a check, and so there's definitely different options for black. Let's maybe start with g2, and g2 is really the worst of all, because after this we can easily draw by simply playing knight to g6. We attack the pawn, so he has to play h3, and now simply knight to f4, attacking both the king and the pawn at the same time. This is not the way to go. There is basically two other moves that we need to have a look at. Let's start out with king to f2, and this would be again a pretty bad idea, because in this case we are able to reach these squares, which are so important. How do we do it? We go to g4, and after something like king to g3, knight to e3, h3, well, you guys, you know the deal already. What we will do is simply control all of these squares, and we will be able to draw this. In this very position, we would start off by playing this move, which is knight to f1, and we will proceed by just jumping onto all of these squares. By now, we can eliminate both of these squares. Let's have a look at the most important one, which is king to g3, because now it looks like there is simply no way to go to any of these squares, because black is now controlling the very important g4 square. It's gonna be a repetition, because we go back to c4, and now we're threatening to go on e3, which is also connected to f1, g4, and h2. And basically what will happen is, if the black king goes to f2, for example, we will go back. Also, if he simply goes back to f3, we will go back, and this is going to be a repetition. And let's say the black king doesn't really like that, and he goes to f4, trying to control this square. Well, now we still want to control these squares, but now we go the other way, and now we can actually go via f1, because we play this move knight to d2. Also, let's say the black king isn't really interested in moving, but instead he goes for this move, which is h3, then actually this is gonna be a draw, as you guys know, because we're able to connect with all of these squares. We go to e3, and after king f3, this is, as you guys know, simply a draw. I will show it to you for the last time in this video, but basically what we do is we go to all of these squares, and there is simply no way eventually we will be able to pick up this pawn just like this. I really hope you learned something from this video, you enjoyed the video, and as always, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye!